Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's Tuesday. I'm telling you, this has got me all messed up on my days of the week. So I hope y'all are being productive with your time, and I hope everything's going well. I still find myself just as busy as I've been, so I hope everybody's getting stuff done, and staying on task, and staying in the Word, and staying, prayerful and all that kind of stuff. Not just having too much time, because I get messed up there sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I've got plenty of time. Like, I've been wanting to clean out my closet since quarantine started, but I'm like, oh, I've got time, and I just haven't gotten around to it. Don't do that. Don't be me. But I want to talk to you about Hosea chapter 2 today, and I titled it, Are You Turning Back to God Out of Desperation or Gratitude? And again, if you watched my video yesterday, or not, Hosea was a prophet of God, and he was, God told him to marry this promiscuous woman that was going to commit adultery, and then she did, and he was using it as a giant object lesson, as an analogy of God's people turning their back on God. Basically, it's kind of like God's people committing adultery on God, because we're the church, we're the bride, he's the bridegroom. Anyway, so it's just a giant object lesson, and he is going to use Hosea to show the love of Christ through his wife Gomer at some point. But chapter 2 is talking about the punishment, because that's the whole point of this, is that, okay, chapter 1 was just kind of explaining that God told Hosea who to marry and kind of what she did. Chapter 2 is going into, okay, now the bad stuff's happened, so this is kind of the analogy of both what she's done and kind of looking through the lens of God looking at his people as a whole during this time. Because remember, this is the Old Testament people. This is the same people we've been talking about for I don't even know how long. God's people led them through the wilderness. Now they're in two different, they've split into two different spots, and they're all worshiping idols, and they'll do good for a while, and they'll go back to worshiping the idols, and that's just where we are. So there's some really cool analogies in this analogy that I think are very applicable to today's church, not just that church. And so that's some things I wanted to point out. And so I think this is a good chapter for you to read. It's only 23 verses, but I'm not going to read all of it to you, but I'm going to read some bits and pieces. And I want to read, specifically, I want to pay attention to verses 7 and 8, but I'm going to kind of set the tone and read the verses leading into it. So starting at verse 1, say of your brothers, my people, and of your sisters, my loved one, rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her remove the adulterous look from her face and the unfaithfulness from between her breasts. Otherwise, I will strip her naked and make her as a bear as on the day she was born. I will make her like a desert, turn her into a parched land, slay her with thirst. I will not show my love to her children, because they are the children of adultery. Their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. She said, I will go after my lovers, who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. Therefore, I will block her path with the thorn bushes. I will wall her in so that she cannot find her way. She will chase after her lovers, but not catch them. She will look for them, but not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my husband as at first, for then I was better off than now. Verse 8, she has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil, who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. This is the big thing. This is using the analogy of his wife, but he's also talking about his people in general at the time. But he is, the thing that got me is said that she's going to chase after her lovers, but she's not going to be able to catch them. And then she's going to say, I'm just going to go back to my husband because I was better off as I was before. That's the first thing that I want to point out. And I thought the way, okay, this makes sense to the people of Israel, because they would worship idols, worship idols, worship idols. And as soon as punishment and consequence of that action came into play, they would turn back to God because, oh man, this is a hot mess. We were better off before when we were worshiping God. And so now we're going to go back to that. Well, in our day and time, we're guilty of the same thing, yet we're chasing after different things. We're not worshiping Baal. We're not worshiping a golden statue or offering incense to a false god or something like that. But what do we chase after and end up getting ourselves in a mess and then turning back to God and being like, oh man, things were way better. And that's something that I feel like I've done on numerous occasions in life, not just with a spiritual, application, just in general. Sometimes you go off into something that you know probably isn't a great idea, but you do it anyway, and then you get into it and you're like, man, I wish I could just go back to the peace that I had before I ever started this. Like I remember one time, just a specific example, is I had this job, working as a nurse when I was still at the bedside. It's very hard to find a nursing job that gives you good hours. And I was in a job where I was working Monday through Friday. I didn't work weekends. I didn't work most holidays. Had a very good schedule, very good job, very good coworkers. But I got frustrated with some things, and I thought that I knew better than, and I said, I'm fixing to take another job. And I didn't pray about it before I did it. And then I basically forced myself into a position, got the position, was there 2 weeks, and immediately knew this wasn't what I was supposed to do. And I thought, and I was working a weird schedule, I was working weird hours. I had Kyle at home. Carden was still really young, like just about a year old. And I was just so miserable. And I thought, if I could just go back to the way that it was, if I could just go back to the schedule I had before. Yeah, I was frustrated. Yeah, I was mad. But what I had before was better than what I have now. The grass was not greener on this side. I really didn't have it as bad as I thought I did. And I think sometimes that's what we're guilty of in life in general, and that's what pulls us away from God. That's what distracts us and pulls us away from our spiritual walk. That's what pulls us away from being obedient to God's word and his principles, is because there are things that Satan waves in front of us, and we're like, ooh, I think I'd like that. Another instance is there was a time that I was going to buy a new car. Didn't need a new car. Had to have it though. Kyle tried to talk me out of it. I was like, no, I've never bought a new car. I've been a nurse for this many years. I can have me a car. Well, then I got the car and I loved it for about 6 months. And then after that, the new wore off and I still had a payment for much longer than that. And I was mad that I did it. And I said, you know what? If I could go back and do it over again, I would have kept the old one and not had this payment to deal with every month. How often do we do that? And just not spiritual things, but think about it from a spiritual standpoint. What do we let pull us away from God because we think it's a good idea. We think it's what we need. We think it's what we should have. We think it's what we are entitled to. And we let it pull us away, and we turn around and we're like, I want to go back to the way it was. This coronavirus quarantine is a very good example. I've said for years, I would love to teach nursing online from home and be a stay-at-home mom and a stay-at-home wife and teach nursing on the computer from home. Guess what? No, I don't. I want to go back to work. I want to go back to my office. I want to go back to the hospital with my students. I want to go back and teach in the classroom. I don't like this online stuff. Sometimes what you think you want is not what you need. You just need a break, or you need to prioritize your time and get your priorities in line. Sometimes that's what we need. But we do all of this and we get so distracted by all the things we think we need. We think we need a bigger house. We think we need a better car. We think we need a different job. We think we need X amount of kids to complete our family. We think that we need a spouse. And then we think we need somebody else's spouse or a different spouse or not a spouse anymore. And we get all distracted by all these things that the world tells us that we need, or the world tells us that what we have, the version of it, is not good enough and we need to upgrade it. It's like a cell phone comes out every other week. You'll upgrade your phone and a month later you'll see a commercial about a new one and you're like, oh no, I need to upgrade again. There's nothing wrong with what you have. You're just distracted by what the world says you should take, that you should need, that you should put your time and energy and money into. And then you get caught up in that life, and then you sit back and you think, I kind of wish it was the way it used to be. That's something I've learned in this quarantine. This is more like the life that I had when I was a kid. There wasn't all this extra stuff to do. We played in the yard with our cousins. We, watched whatever was on TV. There wasn't going somewhere every night. Eating out was a novelty. Eating through the drive-thru was eating out back then. There wasn't no sitting down in a restaurant. And we've been so distracted by what is normal to the world that we don't even look at God anymore. We don't even pay attention to what he's telling us to do. We don't pay attention to what he's telling us not to do. And we turn around twice and we're so distant from him that we don't even know who we are anymore. And in this statement in verse 7, she's chasing after the world. She's chasing after what her flesh wanted, and she came up wanting and needing something, and she was desperate to get back wanting peace again. And so she says, you know what, I'm going to go back to the one thing that I know is solid. I'm going to go back to the husband that I married, that I know has got me, who has provided for me and loved me, even though I've not treated him fairly. What does that sound like? Doesn't that sound like us and God? We're a hot mess. We're chasing after the world. We're chasing after the pleasures of the flesh. And just as soon as we lose our peace, or just as soon as we lose our joy, we want to go back to the Father, who we know is going to have our back, who we know has always had our back, who we know is not the author of chaos, who's going to come through. If he speaks it, it's going to happen. That's not how a relationship should work. No wonder this was a broken marriage. It was totally one-sided. And that's the thing with our relationship with God. It should not be one-sided. It should not be just God showing up whenever we freak out and have something going wrong, or have, a desperate outcry because we've messed our life up yet again. Relationships are never functional if they're one-sided. And I love that they used a marriage here, because the church is supposed to be the bride of Christ. That's us. So if you think about, if you're married, have been married, whatever, aspire to be married, you think about the relationship. I know, like, Kyle and I are coming up on our 10-year wedding anniversary, and I know the give and take that is required in our relationship. And if just one of us was putting in that effort, if just one of us was reliable, if just one of us was loyal, it would be messy. But that's how we treat God. And then when it all falls apart, we turn back to him in desperation, rather than just praising him for who he is, being thankful for what he's given us, and being thankful for the fact that he is in this relationship with us, because we're not worthy. You're not, I'm not, nobody is. We should be grateful that he even looks at us, much less loves us. But we just turn to him when we have to. It's like just going to your parents when you're a teenager, when you need something. Mom, I love you. What do you want? How much money do you need? What are you wanting permission for? What are you buttering me up for? We can't treat God like that. Can't treat him like a vending machine. But he goes even further in verse 8. He says, she has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the wine, the oil, who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. She didn't acknowledge that her wealth was from her husband. And then she used what he gave her to chase after a life without him. Yet again, another picture of modern day Christianity. Everything that we have is a blessing from God. Your house, your money, your job, your family, all your health, your life, the breath in your lungs right now is a gift from God. All of it is his. And we won't give him, number one, any credit that the fact that it is his. And then we won't tithe because life is hard and stuff is expensive and we think we got to have all this stuff. But then not only do we not even give God the recognition for giving it to us, we use it to chase after things that are not of, sound judgment from a Christian perspective. And we use it to rebel against him. Like, I can only imagine, like, the way I pictured this in my mind, because, back then, these wives didn't, they weren't like working moms, powerful women like we are now, whatever. These were, women had little to no rights. And especially if you were a promiscuous, adulterous woman like her, she essentially, the only thing she was good for was what she was doing. And so everything she had came from her husband. The home she had, the stuff she had, she didn't earn any of that. She had that stuff because her husband provided it for her, and she used it to commit adultery and have children by other men and to run away from him. And she didn't even give him credit for it. Like, that's essentially equivalent to a stay-at-home mom with $500,000 house and a new Benz in the driveway, taking credit for it and using that to cheat on her husband while he's going to work every day. Like, that's not okay, right? Well, why do we think it's okay that everything God has provided us with, he's given us a home, he's given us a family, he's given us support, he's given us finances, he's given us food, shelter, he's given our family health, he's provided a way of salvation. He's provided for everything that we need. None of us are in want. I mean, not really. I mean, there may be some things that we want that we don't have, but we're not in need. We may want some things, but we're not in need. Not as a whole, anyway. And then we take what he's given us. Number one, we take it for granted. And number two, we use it against him and what he says we should do with it. God gave you a job. You should give him glory for that job, and you should be a model employee while you're at that job so they know that you're a Christian by your work ethic. If he gave you a spouse, then you should honor that spouse in a way that, wives submit to their husbands. Yeah, I submit to mine, and I have a big mouth and a strong personality too, but that's what you're supposed to do. And husbands are supposed to love their wife like Christ loves the church. If he gave you a child, then you are supposed to raise that child and for one, dedicate that child to him from the word go, because he was his. Like, your child was his before they were yours. You were just afforded the opportunity and the privilege to raise them. What are you doing to raise these kids to love God? If you were given money in your account, all he asked, 100% of it is his. All he asked for is a 10th. And I can tell you from personal experience, when you give that 10th, the 90 goes way further than the 100% does if you don't tithe. Try it and prove me wrong. It don't make sense on paper. It doesn't make sense in logic. But I'm telling you right now, I made more money. Kyle and I together made more money, like as far as salaries, and had less bills and had less money at the end of the month when we didn't tithe. Then now we make less money as a couple, have bigger bills as a couple, and we have more money left. Our money stretches further, and we tithe 10% minimum, sometimes more, just depending on. And because it was his to start with, he's just asking for obedience. He doesn't need your money. He doesn't need your stuff. He just wants you to trust him with it. He just wants it to be a faith thing. He just wants to be able to show you that he's legit, that he's real. He gave you everything you have. And if you choose not to honor him with it, then you're going to get yourself in a mess. Just like Gomer did. And she come running back to Hosea. And we're going to see his response in the next chapter and the next video that I make. But today I just want to talk about the fact that she just came running back whenever she was desperate, and she used everything she was given by her husband against him, to break his heart, to be disobedient, to be adulterous, to just go as far opposite of the role she was supposed to fulfill. And if you give yourself an honest look as a Christian, can you say that you have qualities like that in your walk with the Lord? I mean, I'm getting better every day, but some of that applies to me. You know, I don't always manage the time that I have, the priorities and the talents that I've been allotted. I don't always use them properly for God's glory. Sometimes I get prideful. Sometimes I use it for myself. Sometimes I just don't do anything with it, and I get lazy and I procrastinate. But what are you doing with what God's given you? And then if you go on down here, the last thing I want to point out is in verse 14. He says, "Therefore I am now going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards and will make the valley of Acre a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came out of Egypt." So he says then he's going to allure her into the wilderness. I don't know how much of the Bible you've read, but nothing easy ever comes in the wilderness. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, it was hard. When Jesus went and fasted for 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, it was hard. Anything that takes place in the wilderness is difficult. But he was taking her there because he wanted her to be free from distractions so she could hear him clearly. Sometimes God is going to take you to the wilderness so you can put all those other distractions aside so you can focus and hear him clearly and more clear than you've ever heard him before. I've said it a million times, but in my struggle with infertility, specifically when I was going through my miscarriage, that was the first time I ever really heard from God, like really, really heard from God. I'd been a Christian for many years, but that was the first time I ever really can say with certainty that I heard from him. And it was because I was so brokenhearted, because I was so torn down, that I sat in the living room in my recliner with my Bible in my hand, and I prayed and I cried out and I read and I studied and I went fervently to him out of desperation, much like this woman. Not out of gratitude, but out of desperation. And because I was focused only on him and only on how I needed him and how I couldn't fix it myself and how I was broken in a way that nobody could do anything for me, that only he could make this thing happen. I wasn't distracted by Facebook on those days. I wasn't distracted by the television. I wasn't distracted by whatever extracurricular activities were going on. I was focused on, I need God to show up for me right now. It cannot wait. It was priority one. My internet went out for a second. And so sometimes God may do that to you. He may pull you into the wilderness just so you quit looking at everything else. You quit looking to everything else. You quit giving everything else and yourself credit for the fact that your life is put together. The fact that you aren't struggling with anything right this second. The fact that, maybe everything's okay in your life. That's been a source of pride for me because, I've seen, I remember before I ever had a kid and people would go through infertility, I'd be like, I said all the stupid things that people say whenever you don't understand it. Oh, they're just stressing too much, or they're this or that. No, sometimes there's a bigger reason for that. So don't say those things to someone struggling with it. But even when I've seen other people struggle in marriage, and Kyle and I have always been solid. I mean, we have our bad days, don't get me wrong. And we get on each other's nerves just like anybody else. But I've often been like, well, That's not a source of pride for me. There's nothing. In fact, thank God that we're as solid as we are, because we're so different. It is only an act of God that we get along with each other on a day-to-day basis. I mean, just truly, our brains are wired complete opposite of one another. It's hilarious that we're even like compatible. But that's a God thing. Otherwise, there's no way we could even stand to be around each other, much less be married and be functional. And so, sometimes you have to go into the wilderness to quit giving yourself credit or luck or chance or good decisions or whatever, good genetics, whatever it is you're giving credit for, the fact that you've got it going on. So sometimes you have to not have it going on for a minute. You have to be humbled, and sometimes and he's going to attack whatever is held closest to you. And so, I said, about the turning back in gratitude or desperation. God will take you either way. He'll take you if you're desperate. He'll take you if you're thankful. He would rather you be thankful, and that's a much easier way around about it. But if that don't work, he'll take you if you're desperate too. And he never does anything to intentionally hurt you, but he'll let you go through some things to fix your priorities. He'll let you go through some things to adjust the lens that you're looking through. And I think he's done that tremendously with this quarantine stuff. I think we're all looking at life through a slightly different lens now, and all the privileges that we have. And so I just want to encourage you today that, for one, don't use what God's giving you to rebel against him, or you won't have the opportunity to turn back in gratitude. You'll have to turn back in desperation. And understand that if you are in your wilderness, if you are going through that hard time, if things are crumbling around you, then understand that it's just God wanting to take away those distractions, to let down those walls, so that you can see clearly for the first time that he's the only one who can fix whatever's wrong. He's the only one who can give you deliverance from what you're struggling with. He's the only one who can mend your broken heart. And so, I don't know. I feel like I have all these thoughts in my head, and I'm never sure if they come out right. But this one just spoke to me, because I know a lot of times I don't give God the credit that he's due. So, with that, I'm going to challenge you to read it yourself. If you got something totally different, I would love for you to tell me. But with that, I want y'all to read chapter 3 and probably going into chapter 4. Chapter 3 is really short. It's only 5 verses. But I think it's going to have some big, powerful stuff that we're going to talk about in it. So read ahead. Stay with me. We're going to go through this book and see how he does this object lesson with this actual couple that lived out some pretty tough stuff. So with that, I'm going to close this out in prayer and we'll get out of here. So let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for the time we've had to spend here together, Lord. Just help us as we're going through our life to understand, Lord, that you've given us everything that we have, down to the breath in our lungs in our own life, that all of it is yours, and that we should allow you to use it how you see fit and give you credit and glory and honor and the respect that you demand. Help us, Lord, not to use the resources you've given us and the material things, to use it as a method of rebellion. And just, Lord, help us to make sure that we come to you in thanksgiving and gratitude rather than waiting till we need something. And just be with us as we walk through those hard times, as we step into the wilderness, because those times are bound to come. Lord, help us just to put the distractions aside and focus on you and see what it is you're trying to tell us and what you're trying to shape and mold and smooth out in our lives, Lord. And just try to, rather than just praying to be out of the wilderness, but to pray that we get what we need while we're there. so that we can learn what you have intended for it, because we know you work all things to good for those who love you. So just be with us, Lord. Keep us safe and forgive us of our sins. And we love you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, y'all. I'm going to get out of here. I'll see y'all tomorrow. But love y'all. Be happy. Do good.